All right, everyone. Hello. Welcome to episode 2 of the Resident Spotlight podcast here at Whitestone. I am your host, Larkin Pena, Community Life Services Coordinator. And today with me, I have an awesome guest, Mr. Bob Newton. How are you today, Bob?
I'm good, thank you. Yeah, glad to be here.
I'm so glad you're here. Well, let's jump right into the questions, shall we?
Sure.
All right. So, when and where were you born?
Okay, I was born in 1940 in Long Beach, California, although our home was in Wyoming. But my mother was disenchanted with the health care available there, so when it came time for myself and my sister to be born, we were on the city streamliners to Long Beach, and we were born there, and 6 weeks later back to Wyoming.
Well, can you tell us a bit more about your childhood? What was home like? Were you a city kid or a country kid?
Well, I was a city kid, I guess, although our hometown had a population of 4,000 maybe. Mm-hmm. So it was a medium-sized city. For Wyoming, it was, a typical town. My father owned and published the Wyoming State Journal newspaper for many years, following his father's ownership of that, before he went back to law school. And for that, we moved to Palo Alto, California, so he could go to Stanford. Wyoming had not reopened their law school after the war, and so Stanford was the school, and we lived for Palo Alto in a couple of years, and then we were back to Wyoming. And I went to the University of Wyoming, and I was the youngest of three, brother and sister both older than I, 2 and 4 years older. I had a good experience at the University of Wyoming.
Well, in terms of being a student, would you consider yourself the smart kid or the class clown?
Well, I wouldn't be the class clown, I don't think. And I did pretty well in school grade-wise, so yeah, but not a clown.
All right, so next question. Who did you look up to as a young person?
Right. Probably first and foremost my father, who was a very successful newspaper publisher, and then he went back to school, got a degree in law and practiced law. His father, my grandfather, was also very well known in the state of Wyoming, was instrumental in the whole tourism business and setting up a system of signage and so forth for the whole state to guide people through various tourist attractions and so on. He was very active. And then my uncle AC, they call him AC. I don't really know what his first name actually was. Everybody called him AC. He lived in Sheridan, Wyoming, and I remember his big thing was to pick figs off of our fig tree in California when he would come to visit. He had a stick with a little notch on it, and he could pull the branches down and pick the fig. He was famous for that.
Lots of interesting men in your life, and it seems like law runs in the family, huh?
Yeah, well, maybe so.
Well, you talked a little bit about your college experience. Mm-hmm. So just tell us about your education and some previous occupations you've been into.
Right. Well, I graduated from high school, obviously, and I went to Oregon State, Corvallis, for a year. I had hoped to be there longer than that, and I went there because my uncle, who had graduated from Oregon State, was convinced that if I went to Oregon State, I could make the basketball team. He was wrong.
But you're so cool.
There were 2 slots available. The rest were already scholarship, and there were about 20 or 25 of us trying out for those 2 spaces. I had no chance. But I stayed there for a year at Oregon State, and then because of the tuition costs and so forth, I went back to the University of Wyoming and graduated. And I had a good time at Wyoming, and I was very active in the Air Force ROTC, which put me in line for some postgraduate assignments in the Air Force, which is what I did right after college. I was in active duty in the Air Force for a while. School was good for me. I go back to Wyoming from time to time, and it was a good experience. Yeah,
it's beautiful in Wyoming.
Yeah.
I haven't been, but it's on my bucket list.
Oh yeah,
yeah.
Well, our big deal was to rappel. Many of us were mountain climbers, and the Student Union building was about a 5-story tower. And so our big deal was to rappel off of the Student Union building, and if we could entice any of the female new arrivals to come to the top, we'd take them down in a basket and so forth. It was all very exciting.
I love that.
Yeah.
Sorry, I'm hung up on occupations.
That's
You're just
okay.
an interesting man.
Yeah.
Well, have you done like any volunteer work or anything?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, hospice and palliative care in Greensboro has been a significant focus of my volunteer work in recent years. And I've always been open to opportunities like that, but my main volunteer activity now is with hospice and palliative care of Greensboro. Yeah.
Well, it's cool if you want to talk about this later, but your wife was telling me something about the Interactive Resource Center.
I hadn't remembered that. My memory's a little fuzzy here, but I remember, quote, starting the Interactive Resource Center, that we needed some mechanism to capture the attention of volunteers and so forth, particularly in service to people who were homeless. So we've found this building down south downtown area that was vacant, and the guy who owned it, I can't remember who it was, said, well, you can use the building if you want it. It's empty.
Yeah.
It was really empty. There were a few little empty offices in one corner, but mostly it was a warehouse-type space. And so moved in there and began to provide services to people who were experiencing homelessness. We built a bike shop in the back so that we could acquire, renovate, and provide bicycles to people who needed a way around, transportation, and other things like that we were able to do. That was a kind of a interesting and very rewarding opportunity for me to get out and do something productive.
Yeah, that's very cool.
Yeah.
And the IRC is still active
Still
today
active, yes, it
for
is.
the folks that aren't Greensboroians, right. I suppose.
Yes, indeed. Yep.
And you can see them doing projects like Plarn Project.
Mm-hmm.
Quick little shout out for the thing we do here.
Yeah, sure.
Well, you have a lot to be proud of, Bob. So just switching gears a little bit,
yep.
Where's your favorite place you've lived? Where else have you lived as an adult?
Well, let's see here. Of course, I grew up in Wyoming, and I spent almost all my growing up years in Wyoming. We lived in Palo Alto, California for 2 years while my dad went to Stanford University. The University of Wyoming had not reopened their law school at the time, and so Dad applied and was accepted at Stanford. That was a very interesting time for us. I was a youngster at the time, but Dad was in law school at Stanford, and my mother sang in the San Francisco Opera. She was quite an accomplished singer and musician. I went to school there a couple of years, and then we moved back to Wyoming. I spent the rest of my growing up time there. Let me see, where were we on the question?
Wyoming just kept bringing you back.
Oh, yeah. Well, and then I went to Oregon State for a year thinking I could play basketball there, but that didn't work out. Came back to Wyoming and finished college there and went into the military from that point. I was pretty active in the Air Force ROTC, and so I had a regular commission, which was a little bit unusual, as opposed to a reserve commission. 5 years, I guess, in the Air Force active duty before I went inactive, and stayed in the Air Force Reserve for the rest of my 20-some years. But that was the kickoff of my professional life, I guess.
Just out of curiosity, what made you stay in Greensboro?
Well, I was in Omaha coming out of the Air Force, and I got a job with a small consulting firm that had a contract to do some consulting work at Charlotte Memorial Hospital, and primarily the installation of the newly released IBM 360 computers. I was on sort of temporary duty in Charlotte. One thing led to another, and I just stayed in North Carolina after that. Got a job at North Carolina Memorial for a year, came back to Charlotte, and then to Greensboro, working in the hospital field. Initially in the field of computer science, and then ultimately finance. And
sort of a jack of all trades.
Well, yeah, but mostly finance and information systems, yeah, as opposed to some of the other disciplines that one might think about when you think of a hospital.
Well, switching gears again, this is where I kind of get on the more emotional side of the interview.
Okay.
But tell us about your relationships. Do you have any children? Who would you consider people who are important to you?
Yeah, well, I've been married twice. My first wife, with whom I am still on very good terms, as is my current wife. We had 4 children, all of whom are still living, and some of whom live reasonably close to us in North Carolina, so we see them on a regular basis. And let me see, where was I going with that? My current wife, Donna, and I do not have any children of our own, but my kids and her kids are kind of a merged family, and we're all very congenial with one another. We get together regularly, but not, I wouldn't say frequently, but on a regular basis, 3 or 4 times a year. So we have a nice family situation, and that's very nice. And then my first wife is in North Carolina. She is, quote, a part of the, quote, extended family. We're on very good terms with her, and she with us. So it's been a good situation as it's evolved over time.
For sure. I know Donna thinks very highly of you.
Oh.
When I was figuring out who was going to be my next person for the Resident Spotlight, she reached out to me and she was just like, hey, is Bob on your list?
Oh,
and I was just like, actually, he is.
She's the one. Uh-huh. Uh-huh.
So yeah, it worked out that we both were thinking of you.
Yeah, that's good.
Yeah. All right. We've been talking a lot about important people from family, friends, that type of thing. Did any of those people give you the best advice you've ever received?
Well, I don't know about giving me advice per se. I will say that I think my father was a significant person in my life, and I looked up to him and followed his example, if you will, in a number of areas. He was a very conscientious and loving father to all of us, hard worker, successful newspaper publisher, and then sold a newspaper when he was 40. Wyoming hadn't reopened their law school. Maybe I already mentioned this, but so he applied for and was admitted to Stanford Law, and we moved to Palo Alto, California for a couple of years. My mother was able to then sing in the San Francisco Opera, which was a big deal on Saturday mornings when we would run back and forth to San Francisco for rehearsals. Had a good little time in California. We enjoyed it a lot. We had a neighbor two houses down who was a ceramicist, and she had a beautiful ceramic shop and was a very accomplished artisan. And her stuff, when it was finished, went to the major department stores in San Francisco for sale. It was very interesting to have a neighbor like that who is so actively engaged and so professionally competent in her field. We enjoyed our company with her a lot. And then after Daddy... when the law school reopened in Wyoming to avoid the out-of-state tuition, we moved back to Wyoming, and he finished law school there, and we lived in Lander, and where we had grown up and graduated from high school there, and went to Oregon State for 1 year, and then back to the University of Wyoming, and then on from there in the military. Yeah.
So rather than like specific advice, it just sounds like a lot of the people in your life led by example and kind of inspired you to be a hard worker.
Yeah, I would say so. That's probably true, yeah.
I love that. So switching gears again, from what I understand, you've done a lot of traveling between the Air Force and just where you are now. Is there a favorite place you have traveled to? How many places have you been to?
Well, I've been halfway around the world. I've been as far east as the British Isles, England, which was a very happy experience for us. Donna was with me at one time. We had some good friends from England who have visited us in the United States. And on the other side, I was in Japan for a while, on the island of Guam with the military, working there. And I've been sort of in between those two places, East and West Coast. So it's been an interesting time for me to be able to travel that much and to be located in those different places. I was in Little Rock, Arkansas during the Cuban Missile Crisis, and that was a kind of a dicey experience.
Yeah, for sure.
So among the more significant points of time, that was one of them probably.
Tell me about your time in Moldova and Russia.
Okay, well, let's see. Moldova and Russia. I'll have to think a minute now. I got acquainted, I guess, we were in Europe. I was acquainted with a couple of people, and I don't remember exactly how it is that I got acquainted with these folks. But anyway, they were from Kirov, Russia. So we were in Europe, and my wife and I split. She came back to the United States, and I went to Russia from Moldova, visited there. And I still have a couple of acquaintances there in Moldova that I keep in touch with from time to time. And the state of North Carolina has a relationship, a somewhat formal relationship with the Republic of Moldova. So I've been able to plug into that, and through the Office of the Secretary of State, several of us have become involved on a sort of a semi-ongoing basis with the activities back and forth between the state of North Carolina and the Republic of Moldova initially. But then after that, it became more purposeful as we became better acquainted and with one another and so forth. Yeah.
Didn't you establish a hospice in, I can't pronounce it, the one that starts with a K?
It starts with a K.
Yeah.
Oh, Kirov,
yeah.
Russia? Hospice was a feature of the healthcare delivery system in the United States. It was not as prominent in some of the other areas of the world, and Kirov, Russia was one of those places. Moldova was another one. I, along with some other people from time to time, were able to lend our experience as our involvement with the hospice in the United States, and helped set up a hospice both in Moldova and in Kirov, Russia. Yeah, it was new to them at the time, and so it was a very interesting time for us in Russia in particular, because we were way up, north in Russia, in an area where we really had no other connections other than this very tenuous one with the folks that were interested in the hospice. And so I got acquainted with the folks in Russia, and both military and civilian people, and it was a very interesting time. Yeah.
So all of our folks listening, just keep in mind that Bob Newton is a man known around the world.
Well, I don't know about that. Part way around, anyway.
So lots of interesting places you've been to. You've definitely had some influence on a lot of places. What are some things that you really like to do? It could be an activity, a hobby. Tell us about that.
Yeah, well, as I mentioned earlier, sports in general is of interest to me, and I like to participate rather than just be a spectator. So I play a lot of tennis, it's not a lot of tennis, but I play all that I can.
Yeah.
I have played golf. I don't play golf as much anymore as I used to. I grew up playing basketball, and that was kind of my number one sport. And I still love to shoot baskets and play that game. Trying out football didn't work out too well, and I can remember quitting, quote unquote, football, and my coach called me up during study hall, and he said, "I understand you're quitting the football team," and I said, "Yeah." So he quizzed me at length about why that was. Finally, he said, "Okay, if that's what you want to do, go ahead." But he was concerned about me quitting because he didn't like people who quit on his football team. But anyway, that was a kind of an experience when I was a youngster. Where were we?
I mean, it seems like, and correct me if I'm wrong, it seems like the coach is like, well, I don't want to lose a good player on my team.
Yeah. I'm 6'4". If you stretch it a little bit, I'm 6'4". But I was 6 feet tall as a freshman in high school. So that was pretty tall.
Yeah, for sure.
And another one of my classmates, Willie Fossey, was also 6 feet tall. And then we had several basketball players who were Native American, Arapaho and Shoshone Indian heritage background, and they were our, quote, rabbits. They were all 5'8", 5'9", 5'10", much shorter than we were, but very quick and very fast. So we'd have three rabbits, and the two of us was a very successful basketball combination while I was in high school. And I love to play basketball. I still shoot baskets whenever I can. It's a fun thing for me, yeah.
I know before we started recording again, I brought up singing. You say you're not very good, but we know that's not true. You are a good singer.
Well, I'm not sure about that. I really am not. I like the idea, and I like the idea of being in a chorus. But mostly it's the interaction, the social interaction that appeals to me more than the singing per se. Yeah. I'm really not a very good singer, but I can get by. And
also, you can get low, that's for sure.
Yeah, well, I can do that. Yeah, I'm in the low range, that's for sure. Yeah.
All right. Well, switching gears. I always like to throw a little random controversy into the interviews.
Okay.
What do you think is more important, being good looking or being smart?
Oh, being smart. Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, looks are okay, but if you're smart, you can do things that matter.
Yeah.
And that's important to me, is, being able to have a positive influence and positive impact, constructive outcome, all of that sort of thing is what I think is much more valuable than the surface appearance might otherwise dominate. Yeah.
For sure. Yeah, I definitely would have to agree. Of course, people can definitely be both and people can be neither.
Yeah, that's true.
Much.
Yeah.
But beauty is temporary. The brain is going to last you a lifetime.
There you go.
So,
that's it.
Yeah. All right. Well, let's get back to you personally. Can you tell us the most embarrassing story about yourself that you have? There's no limits.
Well, that's a tough one. Nothing comes to mind at the moment. I've had a tendency to kind of play it straight, so to speak, and stay out of trouble if I could, and perhaps be a little on the conservative side in many situations rather than being out front and dealing with the inherent risk of being too out front or whatever you might say. Yeah, so that's kind of been my personality growing up and as an adult.
Yeah, sort of reserved, keeping to yourself. Definitely an easy way to keep yourself from being embarrassed.
Well, that's true. Yeah, that's true. Yeah, and although I'm not opposed to getting involved if I know what I'm doing and I recognize a productive way to become involved.
For sure. Let's jump into something that you're incredibly proud of. It could be something, someone. It does not matter. There's no limits.
Well, I'm proud of my military service. I think I committed to what I thought would be a career in the Air Force when I was in college. And when I got out of college, of course, I went on active duty and was involved in some significant work with the Air Force at the time. Something changed my mind. I'm not sure I can pinpoint it exactly, but after 5 years, I decided that maybe I would go in the reserves and not be on active duty anymore. So I hunted around for a job, and I was in Omaha, Nebraska at the time, and I got a job with a company that wanted me to go to Charlotte for an assignment that they had there, and so I wound up in Charlotte and wound up staying in North Carolina, and that's what got me to North Carolina and ultimately into the hospital field. First in Charlotte, then in Greensboro, then in Chapel Hill, back to Greensboro.
Yeah, you're definitely someone that's had a lot of influence in the areas you passed, like with hospice and the IRC and military service and all that good stuff. I have a bit of like a random question. Could you tell me if, I don't know what the word is, instrumentality, I suppose? I don't think that's a real word.
Well, yeah.
I mean, what you ended up doing for the Greensboro Rotary Carousel that's at the Science Center. Yeah.
Well, of course, you have to back up one step. Rotary itself is a service organization, and you can, some people, frankly, are, quote, members because it's the thing to do. Or maybe their employer even expects them to be involved or whatever. It's a kind of a superficial membership. Other people in Rotary are much more active. I personally don't like the idea of just belonging. If I'm going to be a member of the Rotary Club, I'd like to be involved in some meaningful way.
Yeah.
So the carousel, which was a big project and I thought a worthwhile one, became one of the ways that I was able to fulfill that interest in being actively involved. It was a big project, $3.5 million worth of carousel out there. Hopefully the community appreciates the carousel and enjoys it, and other things have grown up around it so that the area there is much more well developed than just the carousel, and that's gratifying. Yeah, so
for sure,
it was just an opportunity, and you if you're interested at all, you grab those opportunities when they come along.
For sure.
Yeah.
Well, if it's any consolation, I used to work at the Greensboro Science Center.
Oh, did you?
I worked there for almost 10 years.
Oh, really?
Yeah. So I'm a big fan of the place, but when I was a teacher, it was always the best part of the week when the kids got to go on the carousel. They were obsessed with all the hand-painted creatures that they could ride on. They just absolutely adored it. They went on it once, and I was like, all right, it's time for us to leave. And they're like, no, Teacher Larkin, we have to do it 5 more times.
Yeah. Well, timing-wise, so was Glenn Dobergoats already there when you were at the Science Center? Yeah, okay, because I was there earlier than that and was involved in recruiting him to Greensboro from Indiana or wherever it was up in the Midwest that he was previously there. So we got him. I can remember our sessions where we were saying, now what's it going to take to get this guy, and yeah, I'm glad we did.
Yeah, y'all made a good choice.
Yeah,
he is a great man.
Yeah.
All right. Well, we talked a little bit about everything so far, but I am curious, is there something about yourself that you don't often tell people?
Yeah. That's number 13 here on the list. I'm claustrophobic.
Really?
Yeah, I'm very claustrophobic. Mm-hmm. So you put me in a tight space, with no way out, and I get really uptight about that. And I don't know why. I've just always been that way, and so I have to have a little room to spread out and move around a little bit before I can feel comfortable. Yeah.
That's interesting. I definitely wouldn't have expected it.
Oh, really? Yeah. I don't know. I don't know where that comes from, but it's a characteristic. Yeah.
Yeah. Psychology major popping in right now because
oh, really?
that's what I studied.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
A lot of those fears are like both genetic and environmental, at least it's theorized.
Uh-huh.
So probably someone in your family, maybe your mom or dad, had that issue. I know when I was a kid, I absolutely love bugs now. I think they're neat. But when I was a kid, my mom would scream if she saw even a worm.
Oh, really?
Yeah. So I grew up being absolutely horrified of bugs.
Oh, really? Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Uh-huh.
So it's like I sort of unlearned it somehow.
Mm-hmm.
But I know that it was sort of a mix of her getting it from her mom and then her kind of freaking out whenever she saw them.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, it's never been a big issue for me. I just avoid situations where I would be closed in, but I don't make a big issue of it.
Yeah.
It's just one of those things. I don't know why.
Yeah, that makes sense to me.
Mm-hmm.
Does the claustrophobia keep you from like being a hugger or anything?
Not really, no.
Good.
Yeah, I'm okay with being a hugger as long as there's space around me. I'm okay, but
yeah. Well, that's interesting to know.
Mm-hmm.
Well, we're on to our final question. It's the wild card question, if you will. I try to keep things pretty similar no matter who I'm interviewing, just to give everyone sort of like a good chance to share not the same information, but just things about themselves. That way no one's like, well, person A said their birthday, but person B didn't. So just general information that's good to know. But this question is sort of the fun one, if you will. So if you could make a new golden rule that is a rule that everyone should follow implicitly, what would that be? So for me, one I hear all the time is treat others the way you want to be treated. Like that's sort of like a general guideline for everyone to listen to. But for me personally, like a golden rule that kind of leads my life is paying it forward. So whenever I do something nice for someone, I'm not like, oh, well, you have to pay me back. I just tell them to do something nice for someone else.
Sure, yeah.
So what are your thoughts on the golden rule question?
Well, the things that come to mind, and I'm not sure why. Be firm, be fair. There should be a third one there, and I'm not sure I know what it is exactly, but be firm, be fair. And I like to be, open to what other people are doing, saying, thinking, believing, rather than being judgmental. I don't like the idea of being judgmental because I don't think I have any better answer than anybody else, maybe just different.
For sure.
But everybody's entitled to their own thinking, and they should be encouraged to think for themselves rather than not. So I try to live along those lines. Yeah,
that makes sense to me. Was the thing you were saying be firm, fair, and consistent, or was it something else?
Yeah, firm, fair,
great.
and consistent.
Perfect.
Yeah.
Well, that's a good sort of idea to sit on, because if you don't know, June is sort of like a lot of different awareness months. So sort of like, if I may add, it's sort of like can't really judge people for the opinions they have, but you also can't judge them for the lifestyles that they have.
That's right. Yeah.
Because everyone is just trying to make it in this world.
Make up their own mind. And the key there is to make sure that people have the capacity to make up their own mind rather than assuming that they do not and then trying to make up their mind for them.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, there's sort of a tendency for some force themselves onto people based on what they believe in or what they do. And if you really want to be helpful to that person, you'll share your point of view and allow them to take it into account with their own lifestyle.
Exactly.
All right, so it looks like we've concluded all the question asking, but Bob, I want to thank you so much for dedicating your time to this.
Sure.
I am glad I got the opportunity to know you a little better.
Yes.
So is there anything else that you want to tell the people that are listening right now?
No, very happy to be here and glad to have an opportunity to share my responses to your questions, and wish everybody well.
Yeah, Whitestone is a great place.
Yeah.
I know everyone's so tight-knit. Like, I've never worked anywhere where I felt like so close to everyone.
No, really?
Yeah,
that's good. Yeah.
I'm hoping that's your experience as well.
Yes, indeed it is. Yeah.
Sure.
Yeah.
All right, well, that concludes our second episode of the Resident Spotlight podcast. Again, I am your host, Larkin Pena, and I have been here with Bob Newton.
Great.